contractors and construction projects. And as we go, if you have questions, just pop it in the Q&A there, and I'd be happy to answer them. Some topics that we're going to cover today is working with contractors, selecting and negotiating contract managing, use of lien waivers, very important topic, building department issues, permitting and inspections, building code concerns, general construction knowledge, and of course, just the general CYA, which means call your attorney. No, actually, it means something else. It's cover your you-know-what. And that's what I would like to talk about, because so many people have learned the hard way with contractors and rehab projects. You know, keeping on time and on budget is a difficult thing. And the two rules, of course, of construction projects are it always costs more than you think, and it always takes longer than you think. So, you know, how do you know when a contractor's lying? His lips are moving, of course. You know, you could say that about attorneys too, I guess. But not to denigrate all contractors. There's some very good contractors out there. But the idea, of course, is to get, you know, within a reasonable budget, keep it within budget as best you can, and keep it on schedule. And I'm going to share with you some tips to get that done to make sure you don't get burned by contractors. First thing you have to understand is contractors need supervision. Don't assume a contractor knows what they're doing. Question them if it doesn't look right. Here's a perfect example, right? Contractors, you know, generally know what they're doing, but you'll get different answers depending on which contractor you ask and which contractor you get to bid on your job. And that's a good thing, to get multiple bids. That's the first thing I'm going to share with you, because the first one will bid you, you know, X dollars and they'll for the following. Then you get a second bid for Y dollars for the following. And you notice that there's certain things that the second contractor left out or the second contractor added that weren't on or were on the first one. So go back to the first one and ask them, listen, what about X? What about Y? Or if the second contractor omitted something, what about Z? You know, why did you omit that? And, you know, see, you know, you don't have to say this contractor said this and you're saying that. You could just ask them just generally, and you get a third bid, and you may get different opinions on different projects. One contractor might say that's got to be all redone, and the second one says no, we can just put a band-aid on it. The third one says don't even worry about it. But who's right? I don't know. So you have to really question, think about, use your head, research, Google, and figure out who knows what they're talking about the best to make sure that it's done right. And understand that you can't just leave contractors alone. Now, there's different ways to do a rehab project, as you may know. You could hire a general contractor, and he's going to hire subs, and it's going to cost you. It's going to be supervised in theory by the general contractor, but even some general contractors need supervision. Or you could be the general contractor and hire all the different parts and pieces to be done at different laborers, and you manage the project. Of course, you're going to have to be there all the time to babysit all of the different subcontractors that you're hiring. So you can expect a markup for that general contractor to do the job that you don't want to do. And that's going to be anywhere from 15 to 20% above the bid for the project. So if the bid is $20,000 for the project, you can expect to pay, you know, upwards of $3 to $4 grand for the contractor's supervision for that. Now, should you supervise your own contractors, or should you hire a general contractor to do that? That's up to you. That's up to your comfort level, what you understand about the construction project, and how comfortable you feel managing the subs yourself. I'd probably recommend, if you're on the side of beginner and you don't know everything about it, then hire a general contractor the first couple of times to get the sort of lay of the land of how the construction project works. That doesn't mean you don't supervise that general contractor. You still have to check in a couple of days a week and make sure everything's being done right, because the general contractor is not always there either. A lot of times you're going to hire a general contractor, they're going to hire subs and then disappear on another project and not manage your project as well. So you show up, something's not getting done or something was not delivered, and you're calling up your general contractor saying, I thought this is what I hired you for, right? So don't get crazy if that happens. Just, it's par for the course. Just understand that. Okay. The second thing you have to understand is, in selecting a contractor, there are many variables that go into it. And so many people focus just on price. just on price, which is a mistake. It's a mistake. There are many factors that go into selecting a contractor. First of all, some must-have criteria. You got to have references. I don't care how well you know this person or what kind of reference they came with from somebody else. You want references of jobs they did, several of them, and recent work. Okay. Are they licensed? And what is their license in? So if you ask them, are you a licensed contractor? They may say yes, but they're licensed in electric and they're doing plumbing. Okay, what are they licensed for? And are they licensed in the jurisdiction that you're doing the rehab project in? See, a lot of contractors, they may have a license for the state, but not for the city, or for one city and not another city. And they borrow their friend's license to pull the permit. And we'll get back to that in a little bit, but just be aware of what's going on. Are they insured? Do they have liability and workman's comp coverage? It is incumbent upon you to verify these items. Ask for copies. If they say I'm licensed, ask for a copy of the license. All right. A lot of times contractors will say, yeah, I'm licensed. And they email you the license, and the license says they're licensed for concrete work and they're doing roofing. All right. Or they're not licensed in the jurisdiction that you're doing the project in. Some red flags to look out for is if they offer a cash discount, paying in cash, instead of a check, or a credit card, that is often a red flag. Contractor has no verifiable address or business phone number. That is a red flag. Avoids pulling permits. That is a big red flag. Now, mind you, do you have to pull a permit for everything? Well, according to the city or the jurisdiction, they may be yes. That doesn't mean you're going to pull a permit for everything. You should definitely pull permits for anything that's safe, health, safety, life-threatening. Obviously, something they'll see like a roof, plumbing, HVAC, electric, the big ones. They may further require you to pull a permit if you're redoing a surround in a tub. Do we pull a permit for that? Not always. So just because a contractor says, well, we'll pull permits for these, but I don't think it's worth it to pull it for those, that's okay. But if they don't want to pull any permits, that is a clear indication of either someone who's shady, or more obviously, they're not licensed in that jurisdiction, so they can't pull a permit, because pulling a permit is not that big of a deal. Also, don't focus on the low bid, rather focus on the best contractor and get their best price. Okay. Don't focus on the low bid. Don't get subpar work and a subpar price. Instead, get the best contractor for the money and get their best price. Do they suggest any value engineering? Do they suggest any improvements that would improve the value that you didn't think of? Or on the opposite, downgrades, like less costly finishes, alternative solutions for cold compliance, identify things that you don't need. And that could be a good or bad thing, depending on, what you're trying to do. All right. Some hidden costs you have to be aware of. Demolition, that is, not always included in the bid. Trash hauling, like a roll-off, make sure that's included in the bid. Any equipment rental, a portalet, delivery fees, permit fees, sales tax, building material price increases. So make sure this is all written up into the contractor's bid so that there's no, haggling later over these items. Now, the next thing I want to talk about is the structure of the contract. And this is really the most important thing I want to talk about today. The contract you have with your independent contractor, your general contractor, or even your subs, if you hire them separately, is going to be one of the most important things that you do in your rehab project. Besides getting an accurate bid and making sure that the quote is accurate, which we'll talk about in a bit, the contract is really one of the most important things. Do not accept what are called cost plus contracts. What does that mean? That means they're saying, we're going to supply materials at cost plus X percent. We don't do that. That's not a contract that you want to do. You also don't want to do a time and material contract. And that is, they're billing you for X amount of time at X dollars per hour plus the materials. then you have no control over how long or how short or when it gets done. Very bad way to do it. What you want to do is a lump sum contract. X dollars for supplies, sales tax, materials, labor, permits, roll off, everything in one bid. Okay, a lump sum contract. You do not want the cost plus or time and materials. Here's an example. So ABC Contracting is giving a bid here: demolition and hauling 1,100, drywall 650, painting 900, trim repair and replacement 425, miscellaneous 500, 3575, 50% on acceptance, 50% on completion. Okay. Now, there's a couple of red flags here. First of all, there's no specifics about what materials he's going to use. So how do you know what quality of materials they're going to go into each part of the project? So that's one red flag about this bid. Okay. You want to make sure when you get a bid from a contractor, it is a detailed bid. It should have a scope of work attached to it with specific materials and specific colors, grade, model numbers, etc. So you know you can compare bids from contractor A to contractor B. The other thing is you notice that it's ABC Contracting Inc., which is fine, but make all checks payable to Fred Kelly. Who's Fred Kelly? Is he the owner? Why is he taking checks in his name and not in his company name? You understand? So that's another red flag. 50% on acceptance, 50% on completion. What does, first of all, 50% upfront is a lot. Now, if you have a lot of materials, that may not be out of line, but usually 50% upfront is too much. 50% on completion. What does completion mean? How do you define completion? Whose idea of completion? Yours or theirs? Here's a much better bid. ABC Contracting Inc. Now we got 11 4 by 12 by 1.5 inch pieces of drywall at $16.50 a unit, and 2 5-gallon joint compounds. You know what I mean? This is specific materials, specific quotes, specifically breaking down materials and labor, 25% at contract, 25% after demo, 25% after completion, and 25% after it passes final inspection. That is the proper way to pay them. Okay, now it may be more than 25% or less than 25%, depending on how much is materials. Usually they want the materials costs up front. But this is much, much, much better because it's specific. It has timelines for payment and progress payments rather than time payments, rather than time and plus time and materials. It's very specific, and that's the best way to do it. Now, the contract itself must include the contractor's pertinent info: license number, name, business address, address of the work being done, obviously, the scope of work, and how to handle, most importantly, change orders, which we're going to talk about in a minute. That's where everyone gets tripped up, because they get a bid for $20,000 or $30,000 or $40,000, and then while they're at it, the buyer says, you know, maybe it's a good idea if we do X, or the contractor says, hey, I suggest while we're at it, we do Y, or the contractor calls you up and says, hey, I opened up the wall and boy, you know, I discovered all kinds of these problems. It's going to cost a little extra. Is that okay? Can I do it? And he says, fine. Or it's an emergency, a pipe breaks. And he says, hey, I had to do it, you know, to prevent the place from getting, you know, all wet, which is fine. You know, that's good behavior. But what do you get charged for those changes? You know, if you don't negotiate them up front, you're going to get stiffed. Contractor responsibilities to perform all work to current building codes. There should be specific language in your contract for that. And payment schedules, as we discussed, how you're going to pay them. A termination clause. What happens if they don't do what they say they're going to do by the time they say they're going to do it? At what point can you terminate them? And of course, date and signatures of both parties. That's just scratching the surface, kind of, but just giving you the overall kind of most important things that should be in the contract. And of course, the final lump sum price. Never do a contract on cost plus, never do a contract on time and materials. Now, let's talk about change orders. How do we handle change orders? They're critical for any changes to the scope of work outlined in the contract to have a change order provision. So it can be either for additions, deletions, or spec changes in the project. It should be reflected also in the release of liens, which we'll talk about in a minute, any other work that is done. It must always be in writing, never verbal. Okay. So if you talk to a contractor over the phone, or you talk to the contractor in person and you approve some changes or you suggest some changes, you'd better get that in writing. Because the worst thing that you can do is get bid 40 and get a bill at the end for 75. And you're going, whoa, I didn't agree to this other X dollar, $35,000. Well, you didn't agree to anything. So they're just going to charge you what they think they can get away with. Now, you can negotiate that later, to some extent if you get stiffed. But if you don't come to an agreement, then you got a problem, because they could file a mechanics lien and you're trying to sell the property. Should be signed by both the owner and contractor, and must include the date, the CO number, and reference the contract number preferably, and should always include the price of the change order scope of work. So for example, you could have in your contract that any emergency repairs can be done at the discretion of the contractor. He will bill you for X dollars an hour plus materials. Now that's okay in a change order to have cost plus labor. That's a little different than the entire contract, but at least you have a general guideline of what they're going to charge you for those additional items. The contract should also further state if they do any changes other than emergency repairs in their discretion, and you should define what emergency means in the contract, and they don't get it in writing, they eat it. They eat it. Now, is that enforceable in court? Not always. A judge may say they're entitled to the value of the additional work, whatever reasonable fee that might be, but it gives you a strong negotiating position. When they come back and bill you $20,000 later and say, it says in the contract that anything I don't approve in writing, we both sign, you eat it. Now we're going to come to a resolution on that. Or it says in the contract, you bill me for change orders not approved, that's emergency only, it's X dollars per hour plus materials. Okay. It's better to have they eat it clause than have nothing. Okay. Or to have some complicated formula that you can't figure out. The payment schedule. The payment schedule should be a down payment. Try to keep it about 25%, but never more than about a third, unless there's a substantial amount of materials up front. So for example, if the job involves a furnace, the furnace is going to be a good chunk of the price. So that's okay. But if it's labor and materials and it's about 50-50, still try to keep it, no more than 25% of the total price up front. If the contractor's kind of broke and doesn't have accounts with other vendors, he's going to want you to pay for all the materials up front. And is that a bad thing? Well, it can and it can't be, depending on how much materials we're talking about. Would it make sense for you to go with him and pick up the materials yourself? It might, especially until you learn to trust this person, but try not to give a big number up front, more than about a third. You want to make progress payments. So you want to attach it to milestones, not to dates, not to hours, but to milestones. So for example, we had in the previous bid, 25% upfront, 25% after demolition, 25% on completion, 25% after the city inspector signs off on the permit. Okay, completion. That's a good way. Or you can do the last 25% after the punch list, which we'll go over in a minute. The punch list is a good way to keep the contractor from skipping off on minor repairs. So what usually happens is the contractor might say, well, I'm done with the project, I want all my money. So you give them all the money, and then you go and inspect it and go, wait, there's 10 items here that need fixing. They're minor, but I need them fixed. And he says, oh yeah, sure, I'll get them done in the next 3 days, and then skips off to the next project. Well, if you're not holding back enough money to make it hurt, and I'm not talking about $1,000, I'm talking about maybe 10 to 20% of the total project, then he's going to go off to the next project. He's no incentive to finish. So the idea is he says, I'm finished. Then you walk through and find all the things that are wrong. You create a punch list in writing. You both sign it. You give them a deadline and you hold back X dollars or X percent of the total bid until that punch list is finished. Then you pay them the final after you get the lien releases and the code enforcement, the building department to sign off on all of the permits that were pulled. And yes, the final payment, we said, never made until all work is 100% done, inspected, and approved for the permit. All right. Questions as we go. I'll be happy to answer them. Just pop them in the Q&A or in the chat. Remember, you control the job only as long as you control the money. You know, and lawyers would often say there's a basic principle in law is possession is 9/10 of the law. So as long as you've got the money and they're threatening to sue you and file contractor liens and all blah, 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 as long as you've got the money, you're in control, because you can also always settle with the contractor by giving him some money and getting him to sign off on everything. Once you give them that final money, then now they're in control because they're in possession of the money. And you're yelling at them, the contract says X, the contract says Y, and they're going, so what? Sue me. And who wants to go to court, right? Who wants to do that, right? So make sure you control the money. Punch lists. Essentially, it's the contractor's to-do list for 100% job completion and typically performed after all inspections are passed and contractor claims job completion. It should be written by the owner and signed by both parties. And the contract should require 100%, not 70% or most of it, but 100% of the punch list completion prior to the release of the final payment. It should also include a completion deadline. So if the punch list says you've got 7 days to perform the following, and 3 weeks later they're not done, well, that should be a renegotiation at that point of the final payment. There should be some sort of discount. You may even want to spell that out in the punch list. If you don't finish it within 10 days, then there's going to be a 30% discount penalty for the final payment. Okay, so make sure they do it on time. When the job is done, make sure you retain copies of the following. Here's a good list for you to write down. Contracts, change orders, building permits, lien releases. What are lien releases? Well, if a contractor does work and they're not paid, they can file a mechanics lien against the property to the extent that they're not paid for materials or labor. If you get a lien release signed by a contractor that says, I've been paid for the following work, then they can't come back later and say, I wasn't paid for it, because the judge will throw them right out of court if they try to file a mechanics lien. So make sure you get lien releases from the general. And if you hire a general, he gets them from all the subs. That's his job. If you hire the subs, then you get lien releases. Now, there's two types of lien releases. There's a partial and a full. So every progress payment should be accompanied by a partial lien release. And the lien release essentially says, to the date of this check, I have been paid for all work and materials supplied on this property up to the date of this check. Okay, that's a partial lien release. At the very end, you want to get a full lien release, which says, I have been paid for everything I'm entitled to on this property, and that will prevent them from claiming a mechanics lien. So Yuri asks, would you reject a contractor that does a nice job on budget? That's good. Not trying to get more money with change orders. Okay, I used him for a couple of projects, but probably is not licensed and doesn't pull permits. If you're doing your life and safety things, you do not want to operate without permits. That's really the bottom line. If you're doing, a kitchen remodel, a bathroom remodel, you may get away with it. But if you're doing a roof, furnace, if you're doing electrical work, if you're doing anything that can injure somebody, you definitely want to pull a permit. Because in the law, if there's a local code that says you have to pull a permit and operate by these guidelines when doing electric, and let's say someone later is injured by the electric, and they find out you didn't pull a permit for the electric, there's like a prima facie case that you didn't do it by the book. So that's going to work against you in court. If you pulled a permit and then had it signed off on, there's a prima facie case as a defense that it was all done by the book, and they're going to have a very difficult time proving that you didn't do it right. May asks, what are the pros and cons for adding an incentive and penalty if not done within a set time frame? That's a great question, and that's something I do put in my contract. Carrot, stick. So the carrot is, I say to the contractor, let's say, Joe, what is this job going to take you? And let him say how long. So he says 6 weeks. Okay, fine. If you finish in 6 weeks, I'll give you a 10% bonus, because they'll never be finished in 6 weeks, no matter what they say. If you're finished in 8 weeks, it's even money. And if you're finished later than 8 weeks, then it goes down by X% per week, the remaining money. Okay. Now, some contractors might balk at that. They might say, I can't control this. I can't control the weather. I can't control my guys. They're unreliable. I can't control, delivery of materials. Well, that's why I ask you up front how long this will take you. You want to change that 6 weeks on me, or do you want to give me a realistic number? So I gave him a bonus of 10% for finishing on time. 2 weeks later, even money. That's a lot of leeway there. For a 6-week project, to give them an extra 2 weeks, that's a third more time. If they can't finish it in 8 weeks, if they said 6, we've got a problem, right? The contractor doesn't know his variables enough, doesn't experience enough, doesn't have a good enough reliable crew, then you may not want to use them. Edward asks, do you need a building permit to cut down a tree? And I'll give you the lawyer answer. It depends. It depends how big the tree is, how close to the house it is, how old the tree is, and what jurisdiction you're in. I don't know. Every jurisdiction has their own rules, and you got to get to know what those rules are. Okay. We have a couple of Q&A questions. How do you know if the contractor is using subs, and can the sub place a lien against the property? That's a great question, Dave. The answer to that is, if they're using, they should disclose up front whether they're going to do the project or hire a sub for each part of the project. Okay. And that should be in writing. It's the contractor's job to get lien releases from the subs. If the sub files, and they can file a lien for any unpaid work or unpaid for materials, that's the basics of a mechanics lien, that were provided for the property. If the sub files the lien, it's the general's job to fix that problem, to pay them, to get that lien released. Otherwise, you're going to take it off of whatever it costs you to fix that problem, off of what you're paying the general contractor. And it says that in my contract. Okay. All right, so I'm going to stay on and answer a few more questions. And I wanted to point you to my ultimate guide to rehabbing on legalwiz.com, which is a course you're going to want to get to educate yourself more on the topic. It contains my rock solid contractor agreement in Word format, so you can edit it as you see fit. I think it's awesome, but sometimes if you're running up against problems that are not in the contract, you can add to it, or things that are in the contract, you're getting a lot of pushback from people. You may want to edit a little bit, but I'd say stick to your guns with most of it. It's a pretty solid contract, I have to say. And all it does is hold contractors accountable to what they promise. Now, it has some pretty outrageous things. Like I said, if they don't finish on time, there's a penalty. If they finish ahead of time, there's a bonus, right? Carrot and stick. And it contains all the other provisions that we've talked about. And a lot of people have said they've used my contractor contract, and the contractor says, I won't sign that. And most of the time I'd say, then don't use that contractor, because all it does is hold them accountable. That's all it does. It has a crystal clear scope of work form in Excel, so you can put the little entries in there. Change orders forms, a punch list, lien waiver forms, what work must have a building permit, how to work with building departments, building code issues that are pertinent to a real estate investor, construction knowledge that all contractors, investors should know, the new EPA regulations on lead-based paint and how to comply with that in your rehab. You could find the course on legalwiz.com with all my other courses at legalwiz.com/store, or just go to legalwiz.com and click on the store button. Yuri asks a general question. Do you believe this year will be a good time for flips? I think that it's going to be the same as 2020. So if you believe that 2020 was a good time, 2021 will be the same. I don't think we're going to see anything different in the market this year. Next year may be different because when all these foreclosures start coming through from all these forbearances and payment deferments, we're going to see, I think, a rash of foreclosures in 2022, 2023. But they're not going to come through the system so quickly. Right now, there's a moratorium in most areas on foreclosures. There's a federal moratorium on most of them, and then there's state moratoriums that may or may not extend. So by the time that stuff gets through the pipeline to foreclosure, it's not going to be till next year. Thus, we're looking at the same issue that we had last year: limited inventory, high demand, a lot of people moving, because of COVID. And we're going to see a lot of activity and prices rising. I think that it's a good year for rehabbing if you could find a deal. The retail price of this course is $697. You can get it for just $297 today, which is a super bargain. I mean, just for the forms alone, just for my contract alone, is so worth it because you'll pay an attorney big bucks to write you up a general contractor agreement, and mine is pretty darn solid. All right, let's do some Q&A. Thank you, Yuri. Excellent stuff. Thank you, too. Julie missed the first part. Will this recording be available? You missed the part where I said in the beginning, this is going to be available for recording. And it is streaming right now on Facebook. So it'll be on my Facebook page if you're friends with me on Facebook. Okay. We got almost 50 people today, which is great. I appreciate you guys all coming out and asking great questions and absorbing the material. This will be available for replay on my Facebook page as well as on my YouTube page, which is youtube.com/Bronchick. That should be available probably by the end of today. Make sure you sign up there for my YouTube page and subscribe to my page so you get notice of any new recordings that I do make available, whether they be webinars or other videos that I post from time to time. And there's a good 100 videos on there anyway that you can learn a whole lot from for free. Okay. Any final questions before we wrap up for Wednesday webinar? Yes, we have a few. Yes. Oh, not questions, but kudos. Thank you, guys. I appreciate you all being here, and have a wonderful, thank you. Have a wonderful week and weekend. And if you have any follow-up questions, my email is bill@bronchick.com, bill@bronchick.com, and stop on over legalwiz.com and check out the Ultimate Guide to Rehabbing course. It's just $297, which is a super bargain. It's available instantly online. Thank you, everyone, for joining. God bless.